That one there, the statue in the fur hat, he'd be the easiest mark in this whole square, the young man said, loud enough for half the forecourt to hear, if a king's gate were worth picking. Which it isn't. There's nothing in those pockets but lint and obedience. I was standing close enough to smell the coffee on his breath. I had come down to the gates of Harrogate House that morning the way I came down most mornings, an old man with nowhere he needed to be, watching the crowd the way other men watch the river, for the small things that move under the surface. 41 years I mended watches and clocks before my hands went stiff, and a man who has spent his life reading the work of hands does not stop reading them when he retires. He just reads different hands. And the hands of the young man boasting beside me were the cleverest I had seen in a long while. He was perhaps 25, slight, quick-eyed, dressed a half-step too well for the rest of him, a good coat over cheap boots, the way a man dresses when he wants to look like he belongs to the money he steals. He had a smile that arrived a beat before it was earned, and he had an audience, which is what men like him truly cannot live without. 3 or 4 hangers-on stood around him, laughing at everything, and a girl who looked tired of laughing. "I've worked the cathedral steps, the market, the spring fair," he was saying, ticking them off on those fingers. "I've lifted a magistrate's purse while he was signing a warrant. You want to know the easiest crowd in the kingdom? A crowd staring at something that doesn't move. They forget they have bodies. They forget they have pockets." He nodded at the sentry on the near side of the gate, the red figure standing his post under the great gilded iron, motionless as the stone he stood on. "And him, the king's own scarecrow, he's the best thing that ever happened to my trade. People watch him so hard they'd never feel me take the rings off their fingers." The hangers-on laughed. The girl did not. I should tell you what I saw when I looked where he was looking, because it matters for everything that came after. I saw a guardsman. Not young, not old, a man in the middle of his strength, in the red wool tunic and the tall black bearskin, the white gloves, the polished metals, the rifle held just so against his shoulder. His eyes were forward. His chin was level. He had the particular stillness that is not the stillness of a thing but the stillness of a man choosing, every single second, not to move. I had repaired enough fine watches to know the difference between a mechanism that has stopped and a mechanism that is running so smoothly you cannot see it work. This guardsman was the second kind. There was a great deal happening behind that face. It simply was not happening where the boy could see it. "Watch," the young man said, and I understood that the boast was not idle. He meant to give a demonstration. He drifted away from his little court and into the thicker part of the crowd, where 200 people pressed against the rope line to watch the changing of the sentries, phones up, children on shoulders, everyone's attention pulled forward and up toward the gate. And I will say this for him plainly, he was good. I have watched master craftsmen work, and there is a pleasure in watching any difficult thing done well, even a wicked thing. He did not lunge or grab, he floated. He found a heavy man in a camel coat who was leaning over the rope, all his weight forward, his whole soul fixed on the soldier in the fur hat. And the young man brushed past him, a single soft contact, a stumble half apologized for, and came away with the man's wallet so cleanly that the man's face never changed. The young man's hand went to his own coat, and the wallet was simply gone, folded into him like a card into a sleeve. He came back to his court grinning. He did not show them the wallet. He was cleverer than that, but they knew and they laughed, and the girl looked at her shoes. I should have called out. I have asked myself since why I did not, and the honest answer is the same answer that has shamed honest men in squares since there have been squares. It happened fast, and I was not sure, and a man does not like to shout thief at a stranger on a guess and be wrong in front of 200 people. So I did the small cowardly thing the watchful and the timid both do. I kept watching, and because I kept watching, I caught the second one. He did it not 3 minutes later, and this time I saw the whole of it, because this time I was looking for it. There was a woman at the rope in a green coat with a shoulder bag worn loose, the strap slung but the bag itself hanging open behind her hip where she could not see it, all her attention forward and up, her phone raised to film the sentry's box. The boy ghosted in behind her on the pretext of getting his own angle on the gate. He did not even break stride. 2 fingers went into the open mouth of the bag, came out with a folded card case, and the card case vanished into him, and he drifted on past as though the bag had been a hedge he was only squeezing by. The woman filmed the soldier the whole time. She never felt a thing. She would not learn the card case was gone until she reached for it somewhere across the city, hours later, and stood there patting an empty bag and trying to remember where she could possibly have set it down. That is the cruelty of the trade that the clever never count as cruelty. They do not only take your money. They take your faith in your own memory. They make you the fool in your own story. But here is what I saw that the woman did not, and that the boy, for all his cleverness, did not either. As the boy's 2 fingers went into the green bag, the sentry's eyes were on him. Not on the crowd in general, on him. I was watching the guardsman's face when the card case came out, and I will swear to my last hour that the man's gaze tracked the boy's hand from the bag to the boy's own coat, a movement of the eyes so small that no one who was not, like me, a lifelong student of small movements, would ever have caught it. The chin did not turn. The bearskin did not stir. But the eyes went with the hand, the way the eye of a good craftsman follows the one wheel that is running rough among 40 that are running true. The boy had just robbed a woman directly under the gaze of the only man in the square who was actually looking at the rope, and he had walked away convinced, more convinced than ever, that the man could not see him. 2 thefts now, a wallet and a card case. I stood there an old fool with a secret heavy as a brick, telling myself I would speak the moment I was certain, and despising myself a little, the way you do. See, he said low now to them and to me, because by then he had decided I was a harmless old fixture and worth performing for. He's perfect. He's bait. The whole gate is bait. Every eye in this square is pointed at the one man who can't chase me. You couldn't design a better day's work if you sat down with a pencil. He can see you, I said. It was the first thing I had said, and I had not quite meant to say it. The young man turned to me with that smile arriving early. "Grandad," he said, "he can't see anything but the wall across the way. They train it out of them. He'd stand there if the square caught fire." "He can see you," I said again, because I had been watching the guardsman the whole time the young man was working the camel coat, and I had seen what the young man had not. I had seen the guardsman's eyes. They were forward, yes. But the forecourt of Harrogate House is a wide stone yard, and the great gate faces its square, and a man standing the near post with his eyes level is looking, whether he wills it or not, straight down the rope line where the crowd leans in. The boy had worked the camel coat directly in the guardsman's field of view. He thought the soldier was a blind thing pointed at a wall. The soldier was a watchman pointed at the exact stretch of ground the boy had chosen to rob. "They can't move," the young man said. "I told you, he's a scarecrow." "He didn't move," I agreed. "That's not the same thing." He laughed at me and turned away, and I thought that was the end of it, an old man's idle warning brushed off by a young man who had never yet met a consequence he couldn't outrun. But it was not the end of it. It was barely the start. Because the young man had decided, the way such men always eventually decide, that the demonstration was not complete until he had done the one thing his whole boast depended on. He was going to pick the guard. I want to be careful here, because the thing that happened was both smaller and larger than the people around me understood, and most of them got it wrong even as they watched it. So let me tell it the way a watchmaker tells time, by the parts in order, nothing skipped. The young man's whole theory rested on a single idea, that the guardsman could not react, that he was bound by a discipline so total it had become a kind of paralysis, and that a clever hand could therefore treat him like furniture, could lean against him, lift from him, mock him to his face, and walk away clean because the man was, for all practical purposes, a post with a hat on. It is a common idea. I have heard tourists say it for years. It is also exactly wrong, and the wrongness of it is the whole of this story. A sentry on the king's gate is not forbidden to react. He is forbidden to react foolishly. He will not chase, will not shout, will not throw a punch at a heckler, will not abandon his post to settle a slight, because his post is worth more than his pride, and he knows it. But the same discipline that holds his feet still keeps his eyes moving and his mind running. He is the most watchful man in the square precisely because he is the only one who is not gawking. The crowd thinks he is the thing being watched. He is the one doing the watching. The boy did not know this. He thought stillness was the absence of attention. He was about to learn it is the purest form of attention there is. He squared his coat, said something to his court that made them straighten up to watch, and walked toward the gate. The sentry's relief was due. The changing was minutes off, and a sergeant had come out to stand near the inner rail, an older man with a face like a closed door and 3 chevrons going gray at the edges. The boy clocked him and decided he was no threat. A sergeant by the rail is 20 feet of stone away, and 20 feet is a continent to a man who only needs 1 second. The boy's plan, as near as I could reconstruct it later, was simple and audacious. He would approach the rope where it ran closest to the sentry's box. He would make a show, ask the guard a question, lean in for a photograph, play the foolish tourist, and under cover of the show he would lift one of the bright buttons or, better, a medal, some small dazzling proof he could hold up to his court and say there, "I picked the king himself." It was not about the worth of the thing. It was about the worth of the story. Men like him do not steal for money in the end. They steal for the moment afterward when they get to be the one who got away with it. He reached the rope, he set his elbows on it, and he began to talk. "Long day, friend," he said to the guardsman, warm as a salesman. "Bet your feet are killing you. Bet you'd give a week's pay to scratch your nose right now." Nothing. The red figure did not so much as blink. The bearskin caught the pale morning light, and the medals threw it back, and the man behind them was as far away as the moon, and as present as a hand on your shoulder. "They tell you can't talk," the boy went on, leaning closer, his voice dropping into the conspiratorial register he used on his marks. "I get it. I've got a job where I can't talk either." A few people near him laughed without knowing why. "Tell you what, I'll make it easy. You don't have to say a word, you just have to stand there." He grinned around at the crowd, milking it. "Standing there's the only thing you're any good at, isn't it?" And here is the part that the phones caught and the part the phones missed, both in the same instant. What the phones caught: the boy's right hand, low and casual against the rail, drifting toward the gap below the rope, reaching with 2 practiced fingers toward the gleaming row of medals on the guardsman's chest. It was beautifully done. His eyes never left the guard's face. That is the trick. You keep your eyes on theirs so theirs stay on yours, and his hand moved on its own, the way a good pianist's left hand moves while he is looking at the audience. The fingers crossed the rail. They reached the cool air just before the wool. They were perhaps an inch from the lowest medal. What the phones missed, the guardsman had already won. He had won several seconds earlier, before the hand ever moved, in the only contest that was ever actually being fought, the contest of who was paying attention to whom. While the boy watched the guard's eyes, the guard had been watching the boy's hands. Not glancing, watching. He had marked the overgood coat and the cheap boots when the boy first set his elbows on the rope. He had felt the way you feel a wrong note before you can name it, the particular wrongness of a man who leans in close and keeps his gaze locked too steadily on your face. He had seen, in the bottom of his vision, where a disciplined man keeps a great deal more than the careless ever guess, the right hand go still and quiet and begin its float. And he had done the one thing the boy's entire philosophy could not account for. He had timed it. A pickpocket's whole art is the half-second of distraction, the bump, the question, the laugh, in which the mark's attention flickers and the hand does its work in the dark behind the flicker. The boy had built his approach to create that flicker, the joke, the lean, the grin to the crowd. But you cannot distract a man who has already decided that you are the only thing in the square worth looking at. There was no flicker. There was no dark. The hand reached toward the medal across a foot of perfectly observed air, and the guardsman, without lunging, without grabbing, without one wasted motion or 1 inch of broken bearing, brought his rifle down off his shoulder and across his body in the single sharp ceremonial movement of a sentry coming to the port. The drill book motion he was entitled to make 10 times a day. And the rifle's long line passed through exactly the space the boy's reaching hand was about to occupy. He did not strike the boy. I want that understood because it is the whole measure of the man. He could have. A foot of seasoned wood and steel coming down hard would have broken those clever fingers, and not one soul in the square would have faulted him for it, and the boy would have deserved it by every law of the street he lived in. The guardsman did not. He brought the weapon down in front of the metals, a wall, not a blow, so that the reaching hand met not warm wool and a liftable metal, but the cold, flat bar of a rifle held by a man who had seen everything. The boy's fingers touched the steel. And the boy's eyes, for the first time in the whole performance, left the guard's face and dropped to his own hand, which is the one thing a pickpocket must never do. The instant his eyes went to his hand, every person nearby followed his gaze, and there it was in the bright morning for 200 witnesses. A young man's fingers reaching through a gate rope toward a King's Guardsman's chest, stopped an inch short by the guardsman's own steady weapon. The square did not gasp. That is for stories. What happened was worse for the boy and quieter. A small confused murmur ran through the people nearest the rail, and then someone said, not loudly, he was going for his medals, and then someone else said it, and the words moved outward through the crowd the way a crack moves through ice, and the phones that had been pointed at the changing of the sentries swung, one by one, to point at the young man at the rope. He had wanted every eye in the square. He got them. He simply got them an instant too late to be the one telling the story. Guardsman had not moved again. The rifle was at the port. His eyes were forward. His face had not changed by the width of a hair. He had made one lawful motion perfectly at the perfect time and then become a statue again, but now everyone in the square knew it was a statue with a watchman inside it, and the knowledge changed the whole shape of the morning. The boy stood with his hand still half raised, suddenly aware of the air on it, suddenly aware that the joke had a direction now, and that the direction was him. I wasn't, he started. Step back from the rope, please, said the sergeant. He had not hurried. That was the other thing I noticed, with the part of me that has spent a lifetime watching how skilled men move. The sergeant by the inner rail had not bolted forward the moment the rifle came down. He had not needed to. He had been reading the boy as long as the sentry had, longer maybe. Sergeants on that gate have seen 1,000 of them, and he had simply begun at his own unhurried pace to walk along the inner line so that by the time the boy's hand was stopped, the sergeant was no longer 20 feet away. He was at the rail. The continent the boy had counted on had closed up while the boy was busy being clever, and the boy had never felt it move, because all his attention had been pointed at the man he thought wasn't watching, and none of it had been spared for the man who plainly was. I was just taking a photo, the boy said. The salesman's warmth was still in his voice, but it had a crack in it now, the first crack, and a watchmaker hears cracks. I leaned in for a photo. There's no harm in a photo. Then you'll have no trouble emptying your coat, the sergeant said. Right here, where the gentleman with the phones can see you do it honestly. It was beautifully chosen. I have thought about that sentence many times since. The sergeant did not seize him. He had no cause yet that would hold, and he was far too old a hand to grab a man in front of 200 cameras on a guess. He simply invited the boy to prove his own innocence in the one currency the boy had spent the whole morning collecting, the crowd's attention, and turned it with a single quiet sentence into the thing that would convict him. Empty your coat where they can all see. An innocent man empties his coat. A thief discovers that the audience he summoned has become the jury he cannot dismiss. The boy's court had gone very still. The hangers-on had stopped laughing some moments before. You could see them doing the arithmetic that hangers-on always eventually do, the arithmetic of how far they stood from a man about to be in trouble. The girl who had been tired of laughing had taken one step back, and then another, and her face was not tired anymore. It was something closer to relief. "This is harassment," the boy said. I'm a visitor. I've got rights. You can't search me on the say-so of it." He looked around for an ally and found the old watchmaker standing there, and his finger came up and pointed at me, "Of some old fool who's had it in for me since I got here. He's been muttering at me for an hour. Ask him. He's the one with the problem." I will admit it gave me a strange, small jolt to be made the villain of his story. But I had spent a long time learning not to mind what frightened men say when the gears finally catch them, and I found I did not mind it now. I only said what was true. "I watched you take a wallet from a man in a camel coat by the rope 8 minutes ago," I said. "He's still standing there. He doesn't know yet. The wallet is in your left inside pocket, where you put your own things too, which is how I know you're not afraid of your own pockets, only of someone else looking in them." I had not planned the speech. It came out the way a movement comes out of a watch when you finally seat the last wheel all at once, and all in order. "I mended timepieces for 41 years, young man. I read hands for a living. Yours are very good. They're just not as good as you've told yourself they are, because the only hands you never learned to read were the still ones." The square was quiet enough now to hear the flags. The man in the camel coat had heard the word wallet. I watched it reach him the way you watch a stone reach the bottom of a well, a delay, and then a small splash of understanding. His big soft hand went to his hip, patted, stopped, patted again with the flat panic that has no dignity in it, and his head came up and around, and he said, in the loud, flat voice of a man who has just discovered the floor is not where he left it, "My wallet's gone. My wallet's somebody's taken my wallet." And 200 faces that had been pointed at the boy now had a reason to be pointed at him, and the murmur was not confused anymore. It had hardened into something with a verdict in it. "I never touched the man," the boy said. He was sweating now, though the morning was cool. The clever quickness had gone out of his eyes and been replaced by the thing that lives under it in all of them, the animal calculation of the exits. He glanced left along the rope, where it ran out toward the open square. He glanced right, toward the inner gate, where it ran out toward nothing he could use. He was measuring his run. I have seen 100 men measure a run in courtrooms and on church steps, and once memorably in my own shop. They always measure it. It is the last clever thing the body tries before the slow thing called consequence arrives. He never got to take it. He did not get to take it because of the second thing the guardsman did, and the second thing was even smaller than the first, and even more complete. The boy's weight had just begun to shift toward the open side, that first betraying lean a sprinter makes before his feet have agreed to it, when the sentry, eyes forward, face unchanged, brought his heels together and came to attention with a single hard crack of boot on stone. It is the most ordinary motion a guardsman makes. It is the sound of a sentry simply being a sentry. But it landed in that particular silence like a door closing, and it did something to the boy that no shout could have done. It reminded him in his spine where he was. He was not in the market. He was not on the cathedral steps. He was at the gate of the king's own house, with a soldier an arm's length away who had already proven he saw everything, and a sergeant at his elbow, and 200 witnesses, and an old man naming his pockets one by one. The run he had been measuring led nowhere. There is no running from a place where the still man already has you, because he had you before you knew there was anything to run from. The boy's weight came back onto both feet. His shoulders dropped a half-inch. And the sergeant, who had watched the lean and the settling with the same closed-door patience he had watched everything, said, very evenly, "The constables are coming across the square now. You can empty your coat for me here, quiet, with your own hands, or you can do it for them after the hard way, with everyone watching that too. I'd take the quiet. It's the last thing here you'll get to choose. I have repaired the works of a great many clocks, and I will tell you that there is a moment when you have finally found the fault and freed the jammed wheel, when the whole mechanism gives a small shudder and begins, all at once, to run." The boy gave that shudder. Something in him stopped fighting the works. He reached into his coat, slowly, both hands visible, the way even a thief knows to move when the moment has finally turned honest. And he drew out the camel coat man's wallet and held it up, and the murmur of the crowd rose and broke. Then, because the sergeant only looked at him and waited, he drew out a folded card case, the one I had watched come out of the green coat woman's bag, and laid it down. Then a slim black wallet that belonged to no one anyone had named yet. Then a lady's coin purse with a broken clasp. Then a phone that was not his, and another. Then, and this was the one that undid the last of him, because the crowd actually made a soft sound of dismay. A child's small bright wristwatch, the cheap kind with a cartoon face, lifted from some boy on his father's shoulders who would have cried for it that night and never known why it was gone. He laid them on the flat top of the rail in a row, the way you lay out evidence, the way you lay out a confession when you have run out of words for one. A morning's work, a whole philosophy, spread out on a rope rail in the cold light, and not one piece of it worth what he had spent to take it. I didn't, he tried, one more time, looking at the little wristwatch, and could not finish it, because there is no end to that sentence that a man can say out loud while he is standing over a stolen child's watch with 200 people watching, and a king's guardsman beside him who has not, in all of this, so much as turned his head. The constables came then, 2 of them, unhurried, because the sergeant had sent word the moment the rifle came down, and they had been crossing the square the whole time the boy was busy with his exits. They did not need to wrestle him. There was nothing left to wrestle. They asked him his name, and he gave them one, and I doubt it was the true one, and they gathered the row of stolen things off the rail into a clear bag, item by item, holding each one up so the crowd could see it counted, and the counting was its own small ceremony. The kingdom, in the person of 2 tired constables, taking careful public account of what one clever boy had tried to make disappear. And then they gave the things back. That was the part I will keep. The man in the camel coat got his wallet and was so relieved he forgot to be angry. A young woman pushed forward for the coin purse with the broken clasp and clutched it like a lost cat. The woman in the green coat, who had stayed to watch the fuss without yet knowing it was about her, put her hand to her open bag at the constable's question, went pale, and came forward for her card case with the particular shaken gratitude of someone who has just learned how close she came to spending a week certain she was losing her mind. The phones found their owners, and a constable carried the little cartoon wristwatch along the rope, holding it up, calling, "Whose is this? Who's missing a watch? A little one, blue," until a man near the front turned with a child on his shoulders, and the child's face when he saw it was the whole reason the world bothers to have any law in it at all. The constable reached up and buckled it back onto the small wrist himself, clumsy and careful, and the boy on the shoulders held his arm out straight to look at it, and the crowd that had come to watch a soldier not move found itself, to its own surprise, applauding a wristwatch. The pickpocket watched all of it. They let him watch. There is a mercy in our constables that I have always been proud of, and there is also a justice in it, because the truest punishment for a man whose whole religion is the moment of getting away with it is to make him stand and watch every single thing he took be carried back openly to people who are glad, while he is the only one in the square who is going nowhere. He had wanted to be the man the story was about. He got that too. He simply did not get to choose the story. It was no longer the dazzling tale of the boy who picked the king's own gate. It was the small true tale of the boy who reached for a soldier's medal and found the soldier had been watching him the whole time and got walked across the square in front of the people he had robbed, with a child's blue watch ticking again behind him. I lost sight of him after that, between the shoulders of the constables, going out the far side of the square toward the wagon. I am told it went hard for him in the weeks after, not cruelly. We are not a cruel kingdom, but thoroughly, the way the law goes when a man has a row of other men's belongings on a rail and a square full of witnesses and a girl who, it turned out, was glad to be done and told them everything. The trade he had been so proud of came apart the way such trades do once the secret of them, That no one is watching is publicly disproved. A pickpocket lives on the belief, shared by his marks, that he is invisible. Once 200 people have watched him be seen, every gate in the city becomes a gate where someone might be watching. He had told me an hour before that the still man pointed at a wall was the best thing that ever happened to his trade. He was right, in a way he never meant. The still man pointed at the wall ended it. The relief came up while the constables were still crossing the square. The changing of the sentries went ahead on its minute, because the gate does not wait for any man's bad morning. New boots cracked on the stone. The order was given low. And the guardsman who had timed a thief to the inch, who had brought a foot of steel down between a clever hand and his own metals, and somehow neither broken the hand nor broken his bearing, who had stood through a wallet and 2 phones and a stolen child's watch, and a finger pointed at his own chest without once turning his head. That guardsman shouldered his rifle, faced about, and marched off his post in perfect time, exactly as he had marched onto it. Having shown the whole square the thing the boy could never be taught, that the man who looks like he is doing nothing is very often the only man in the place who is doing his job. I went and found him later, not the guardsman. You do not go and find the guardsman, and anyway by then he was only one more red figure among the relief, indistinguishable, which is rather the point of them. I went and found the sergeant, the closed-door man, where he was filling out his constable's aid form against the inner rail, and I asked him the question an old watchmaker could not help asking. How did he know? I said. Your sentry, the boy was good. I've watched a lot of hands. How did the lad on the post know to bring the rifle down at that exact? He didn't know, the sergeant said, not looking up. He watched. There's a difference, and it's the whole job. Knowing is a guess about the future. Watching is the present, the whole present, all of it, all the time, with nothing taken off it for being bored or cold or tired or stared at. He signed the bottom of his form. Everyone in this square spends the morning watching him. He spends the morning watching them. One of those is a hobby and one of them is a duty, and the boy never could tell which was which. That's why he picked our gate. That's why our gate was the wrong gate. He capped his pen and looked at me for the first time, and something that was almost a smile crossed the closed door of his face and did not quite get in. They all think the stillness means he's switched off, he said. It's the opposite. The stillness is what's left when a man takes every scrap of himself that would have been spent fidgeting and complaining and looking at his feet and being bored and spends it all on watching instead. That boy's been getting away with it his whole life because everyone he's ever robbed was watching something. Find a man whose whole trade is watching nothing in particular and everything in general, hour after hour, and stand a thief in front of him. He shrugged, the small shrug of a man stating a settled fact. There's no easier mark in the kingdom than a thief who thinks the watchman's a scarecrow. I asked him then how a man learns to do that, to spend a whole morning watching, when the morning gives back nothing for it but cold feet and a stiff neck and 200 strangers treating you as a thing to be photographed. It seemed to me a hard discipline to teach, harder than any drill, because a man can be made to stand still by a sergeant's voice, but he cannot be made to truly look. He can only be made to face the right direction. The looking is his own, or it is nothing. The sergeant considered the question longer than I expected him to. He had the air of a man being asked, for the first time in a long while, about a thing he had stopped putting into words because he had so thoroughly turned it into habit. You don't teach it as watching, he said at last. If you tell a young lad to watch, he stares. He fixes on one face and bears down on it like he's trying to push it over with his eyes, and inside a quarter of an hour he's blind to everything but that one face, because a man can't bear down hard on one thing and keep the whole field at the same time. You stare at the wallet and you miss the hand. No, what you teach him is to care. You teach him that every soul who comes through that gate is, for the length of the time they're in front of him, his to keep. Not his to control, he can't control them. Half of them don't even know he's there, but his to keep. The leaning man, the woman with the open bag, the lad on his father's shoulders, his. And once a man truly believes a crowd is his to keep, he doesn't have to be told to watch it. You can't keep what you won't look at. The watching comes free after that. It comes the way breathing comes. He looked out across the emptying forecourt at the place by the rope where the row of stolen things had lain. That boy thought the post was a punishment we'd trained the life out of a man to bear. It's not a punishment. It's a trust. You can drill the standing into anybody. The keeping you have to mean, and a man either means it or he's just a coat on a peg, and the difference doesn't show until a morning like this one, when meaning it is the only thing in the square that's any use at all. And the boy never saw the difference, I said. The boy couldn't afford to see it, the sergeant said. His whole living depended on there being no difference, on every still man being a coat on a peg, because if even one of them was a watchman who meant it, then the gate stopped being safe and the whole square turned dangerous, and a man can't work a square he's afraid of. So he taught himself not to see it. That's the part people get wrong about the clever ones. They think a clever man sees more than the rest of us. He doesn't. He sees exactly as much as his trade can stand to have him see, and not 1 inch past it, and a thief's trade cannot stand to have him see a watchman. So he looks straight at one and calls it a scarecrow, and believes it, because the day he stops believing it is the day he has to find honest work. He capped his pen a second time, though it was already capped. Cleverness isn't a wider eye, sir. Half the time it's a narrower one with a better story told about it. I have turned that over a great many evenings since, the way I used to turn a stiff wheel under the loop, until I understood why it would not run. I built my whole life on the idea that the truth of a thing is in its smallest movements, that you cannot fake a balance wheel, that a clock either keeps faith with the hour or it does not, and that a man who knows how to look can always tell the honest works from the counterfeit. The boy at the gate had built his whole life on the opposite idea, that the truth of a thing is in the show of it, the patter and the dazzle and the moment of applause, and that anyone watching the show can be robbed of the substance behind it. We were each of us, in our way, a man who had bet his life on a theory about attention. The difference is that he met a man who had bet his. A guardsman on the King's Gate is the purest argument I know for the older faith. He makes no show. He offers nothing to dazzle and nothing to applaud. He stands, hour upon hour, in the cold and the heat, while the whole square treats him as scenery and the clever treat him as a mark. And the entire time, behind the fur and the medals and the unmoving face, he is doing the one thing the clever forget is even a thing that can be done. He is paying attention, not to a wall, to you, to the lean of the man at the rope and the float of the quiet hand and the overgood coat over the cheap boots. He is the watchman of a kingdom that has decided rightly that the most valuable post is not the one that moves the most, but the one that misses the least. The boy called him a scarecrow, the best thing that ever happened to his trade, a blind thing pointed at a wall, the easiest mark in the square. He was wrong on every count, and he was wrong in the most ordinary way men are wrong, which is by mistaking the man who is working hardest for the man who is doing the least. There is no harder work in that whole loud square than to stand perfectly still and see absolutely everything. I spent 41 years learning to read the smallest motions of made things. It took a thief at a gate to teach me that the hardest motion to read, and the truest, is the one a disciplined man holds back. He picked a great many pockets in his short, clever career. He told me so himself, proudly, an hour before the end of it. The cathedral, the market, the fair, a magistrate signing a warrant. But of all the gates a man might stand before in this kingdom, there is exactly one where the keeper's only task, all day, every day, is to watch, and that of all the gates in the world is the one the boy walked up to, set his elbows on the rope and called the easiest mark in the square. He was a clever lad. He simply, fatally, picked the wrong gate.